Lakeshore Drive. Now, Lakeshore Drive is a street that travels all the way to the north side of the city along the lakefront. It's a beautiful scenic drive. Empties out onto Hollywood Avenue. That's in a neighborhood called Edgewater. That's actually right in front of my apartment. It makes it convenient getting downtown. If I'm driving right, I can just hop on Hollywood, take Lakeshore Drive downtown. But a couple weeks ago, City Council first up close and personal view of the Chicago skyline coming into being right in front. Incredible photo out there. If you're looking to get some pictures. Now, of course, we're going to be talking about a number of the buildings that we see straight ahead once we get closer, but I want to start by talking about this building here on the left, this really tall tower with the 3 separate heights, right? Covered in different shades of blue, green glass. Kind of wavy looking, right? One of the newest buildings in the Chicago skyline, the stunning St. Regis International Airport. So again, Jeannie Gang is crushing it. See if you can remember that name, Jeannie Gang. Now this is the first part of the tour where I'm gonna nerd out, as promised, and get into some engineering details about the St. Regis. Now this is an innovation that was utilized in the St. Regis as well as a lot of other buildings in Chicago. It is not the newest innovation, but it's a very important one. And it's called and 1/3 less the cost. So, in a building like the St. Regis with 101 floors, 3 towers, 1/3 less the cost on your floor plates is quite a big chunk of change, right? And that's why I tell you about post-tensioning in concrete. Important engineering innovation, especially for these skyscrapers in Chicago.
What is that?
Now, I mentioned that we would be coming onto the main branch of the Chicago River. That's this river. And not only was that terrible for the wildlife and the environment of the lake, right, because it was all dumping into Lake Michigan, but, and I don't know whose bright idea this was, at the same time, the city was needing to explain why that was really gross and bad, right, and needed to change. So, starting in 1892, the Army Corps of Engineers dug a 28-mile channel out west to the Western River System. Like I said, they connected the Chicago River to the Mississippi River System, and they used gravity to change the direction of flow of the Chicago River. So there you have it. Our first incredible feat of engineering that we're going to talk about on the tour, and one that saved a lot of Chicagoans from dying of cholera. So I'm sure they were very grateful for that at the time, right? Cholera, of course, was a very fatal, pretty nasty illness way back in the day. Okay, let's talk about some buildings again, shall we? And we're going to talk about this light-colored stone building here on the right with the clock tower. This is the Chicago favorite, the iconic Wrigley Building. If you've heard of Wrigley's Juicy Fruit Gum, this is the same Wrigley. And this building was built in the early 1920s, and it was modeled after a cathedral in Seville, Spain. So we call this style Spanish Revival style architecture. And the reason why it was modeled after a cathedral in Spain was that the architects here in the United States in the early 20s had not quite figured out their own styles, the American styles yet. So construction that we're going to talk about a lot on the tour today, called contextualism. Let me explain how that works here. So, you can see the 3 patio setbacks at different heights, right? There's one here on the right, then on the left, and all the way up there on the right. Those are at very specific heights. This first one here on the right is at the same height as the roof of the Wrigley Building that we just talked about. This one on the left is at the same height as the roof of that rocket-shaped looking building across the river, Mather Tower. And then that one all the way up there on the right is at the same height as the roof of this black boxy building coming into the building, right? It's sort of an architect's way of giving fist bumps or handshakes to the structures and the environment that surround their building, right? Through the context. Now, the man listed as the lead architect on this building was a guy called Adrian Smith, and Adrian Smith is referred to as the world's tallest architect. Not because he's very tall, he's only 5'7", but because he's the guy who was Bertrand Goldberg, and Goldberg was more of a social scientist. So he was really interested in how people lived. And with Marina City, he wanted to design a fully self-sufficient, self-contained city within a city. And that's exactly what he did. So let me explain how that works. So, in the city, I also really like to imagine what it would have been like in the 60s to look at these buildings. It certainly would have looked like something out of the future, right? A lot of people refer to Marina City as an introvert's dream world. Obvious reasons, right? All right, over to the left, you see the iconic Chicago Riverwalk. It's stretching all the way along the riverside here on the left in the downtown area. And this is a really important project. It was just finished a few years ago. And it has transformed the city's relationship with the river. It's brought more people down the river than ever before in the city's history. Also brought a lot of neoclassical style of architecture. This building is called 77 West Wacker Drive. And neoclassical style, of course, neo is a prefix that means new, so you have new classical, right? So basically, you got key traits and features of your classical architectural styles, like that temple roof, built on a more modern-looking building with modern materials, and that's your neoclassical style. Now, the area of the city over to the left, where this building is located, is nicknamed the Loop. You might have heard that one since you've been in town. And it's called the Loop because our public trains, which also have a nickname, they're called the L. Downpour has cooled it down quite a bit here on the river, so you should all give yourselves a pat on the back for picking one of the best times to be out on the river this evening. It's absolutely gorgeous here today. Now, something important to know about Chicago architecture is this city honors its architectural heritage. And I'm going to give you a couple examples of what I mean by a little bit more modern, a little updated. It's the same basic style, right? That's because he honored the original architect's intentions. Well, the Wells Street Bridge that we're about to pass under, another good example of what I mean by honoring architectural heritage. And that's because although this bridge does look like most of the iconic Chicago-style bridges on the river, they're decades, if not about a century, displayed beautifully, so let me list what those are. The first is that you have those deep inset windows which create vertical racing stripes, and that's intended to draw your eye towards the top of the building. The building narrows at the top, it's covered in precision repetitive patterns, and of course finished with polished Indiana limestone and metal ornamentation. Now again, this was from 1929, the Merchandise Mart. Wow. That was the Roaring 20s, the Jazz Age. There was a lot of optimism in the air for technology, right? So this style was intended to express the Upton in the 1830s, just a couple taverns and trading posts here at Wolf Point. Now this curved glass building here to the left, this is the New Veen building, another good example of contextualism. Let's dig into that. So the curve of the building matches the curve of the river, and the two rows of reflective glass, the bluer glass nicely reflects the blue sky, and the green does a good job reflecting the turquoise green of the river. Again, contextualism, about honoring the context and the environment that surrounds a building. Now, fun fact about the New Veen, that's where Ferris Bueller's dad worked in the little-known Chicago documentary, Ferris Bueller's Day Off. All right, straight ahead, you see this building with the upside-down U-shaped base and the red sculpture in front? This is the beautiful River Point building. Now, I don't bring River Point up because of its beautiful architecture. It is a beautiful building, but I like to point it out because I think it looks like a Hot Pocket. Or maybe a McDonald's cherry pie box. Regardless, I get hungry when I look at it. I should probably just have dinner. It is a pretty beautiful building. All right, why don't we start talking about the oldest building we're going to see on the river this evening, shall we? And I want to focus on this peach-colored boxy building straight ahead on the left side of the river here. This is the historic Fulton House, built all the way back in 1898 as a cold storage freezer building for the meatpacking industry. Now, for much of the 19th and 20th century, Chicago was the meatpacking capital of the country, so there were a lot of those businesses here. And